Hollywood, March 18th, 1962. To the music editor of the Los Angeles Times. Sir, not surprisingly, the qualities which distinguish the Times' appreciation of my new book are ignorance, prejudice, and error. I will deal first with error. I have recently remarked your reviewer's inability to read, a conclusion I reached after he demonstrated that he was unable to follow the most important event in the last act of my opera. Now, to bear out my conclusion, he exhibits his inability to read correctly a passage in my book. He has mistakenly attributed my comment about the late deaf, quote, he tends to use the first person, end of quote, for a remark about the late Languilic. A small difference, he will say, but it is as significant as the late deaf's failure to distinguish between a 12-tone scale and a 12-tone method, which is not, as your reviewer claims, a slight misuse of terms, but a basic misconception. And prejudice. Specifically, your reviewer's prejudice against the vocabularies of educated people. I myself am quite naturally interested in words, if only because of necessity. I have had to become fluent in 3 languages other than my own, and to learn to make my way in 3 more. But my interest in words is not merely philological. I recognize that words are the very instruments of thought, and that a large vocabulary permits the making of distinctions. Your reviewer, as an aspirant writer, ought to understand this, and he should welcome being sent to the dictionary to learn. And not only to the dictionary, how could he, as a would-be music critic, have failed to learn esurient from the title of the 8th phrase of Bach's or any other composer's Magnificat? How could he have read any popular history of painting without knowing Wayne? And how could he have done basket weaving in kindergarten without learning Ossier? And for that matter, how could he have turned his back on my later music without knowing that he was tergiversating? These words which he objects to in my book are at least spelled and used correctly. However, and this much cannot be said of his own excursions into what he calls a sportive vocabulary, he describes the late deaf as a, quote, Stravinsky apostate, end of quote, which is an impossible verbal construction. And his double-errored olla podrida, can hardly be blamed on a printer. And ignorance. Your reviewer confesses that he has never heard of some of the composers whom I nominate as qualified reviewers for a composer's magazine. Still, every one of them has been discussed in Musical America, an exoteric journal of which the local correspondent is none other than your reviewer. With that source of information so close at hand, it should not take much effort for him to keep abreast of musical activities. Such an effort would be worthier than the one on which he has spent so much energy recently. Yours, etc., Igor Stravinsky. P.S. I append some lines by Goethe. They were no doubt written with someone like your reviewer in mind, and they should help him to a better understanding of his problems. Quote, all great excellence in art, at first recognition, brings with it a certain pain arising from the strongly felt inferiority of the critic Only at a later period, when we take it into our culture and appropriate as much of it as our capacities allow, do we learn to love and esteem it. Mediocrity, on the other hand, may often give unqualified pleasure. It does not disturb our self-satisfaction, but rather encourages us with the thought that we are as good as another.